Hello and welcome. My name is Brad Haylock. I'm an academic in the School of Design at RMIT University in Melbourne, Australia. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which I stand today. I'm joining this conversation from the unceded lands of the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, and I respectfully acknowledge their ancestors and their elders past, present and emerging. I'm honoured and pleased to be speaking today with Nan O'Sullivan, who is a Senior Lecturer and Associate Dean in the Faculty of Architecture and Design at Victoria University of Wellington. She's held the roles of Program Director of both the first year program and the Design for Social Innovation program, and she's currently the Deputy Head of the School of Design Innovation. We're speaking today on the occasion of the recent publication of a book titled Design Struggles, Intersecting Histories, Pedagogies and Perspectives, edited by Claudia Murray and Nina Payne and published by Valiz. Nan's contribution to that volume is a chapter titled Do the Mahi, Reap the Rewards, working towards the integration of Indigenous knowledge within design education. It's great to be speaking with you today, and maybe you'd like to say a few additional introductory remarks talking about who you are and the work that you do before we dive into some questions.
Well, thank you for all that, Brad, and what a mouthful my title is, and what a mouthful most of that stuff about me was. So thank you, it was all very generous, and thank you for the lovely acknowledgement of the Indigenous lands in Australia. It's something that I've noticed so many people doing over the last few years, and I'm sure it's a really appreciated change to a system. Yeah, well, I think you said it all. I'm a senior lecturer. Oddly, I am in the School of Design, although my background is in architecture. And I guess it's a lot of the work that I'm doing now that has led me into design rather than practicing architecture. I'm late to academia. So perhaps that is part of why I see some of the things as urgent, not just because they should be done, but how much time I maybe think that I can contribute to it, or what I haven't in the past and need to get on with and do.
Fantastic, thank you. So my first question, in your chapter in the recent book, Design Struggles, you speak about the need to move away from the hegemony of Euro-American and modernist conceptions of design and towards student-centered learning and teaching. So I was wondering if you might be able to tell us more about some of the concrete methods and approaches used in your school to develop localized and learner-centered curricula that incorporate Indigenous knowledge and Maori and Pacifica worldviews.
Sure, thank you. Maybe as an outset, I should explain that, you know, the hegemony of the Eurocentric American sort of model is what I haven't engaged with is a poor critique of the Bauhaus. I'm actually a big Bauhaus supporter, so when we talk about universality and those sorts of things, my critique started actually when I was doing my Masters in Architecture, and it was around visual languages. And it came really from what I saw as a very poor interpretation of the Bauhaus and its social issues and its approaches to design that was adopted within the American version of it. And that is a whole other story that we're not going to discuss today. But so I guess I have grown out of the Bauhaus. My own education and originally in design was from the Bauhaus. But what I really liked about this question when I read it, because I was a little nervous about the interview, of course, was it's just the perfect starting point question for me. It's a real sort of factory floor kind of question for me as an educator, because it was on the factory floor, that sort of first year design studio, and for us that's a lot of students, that I saw the power of that sort of localized and learner-centered curriculum. Because in our first year program, one of the very first things we do, as a lot of first year programs do, is we ask the students about their individual identity, to visualize it or to discuss it or whatever other schools do, but we visualize it. And what I began to see and hear from the Māori and Pacifica students in the cohort, it was like an epiphany for me. on the one hand, unlike many of the Pākehā, white New Zealanders, that we have that make up, obviously the majority of the group, unlike those students, the Māori and the Pacifica students just immersed themselves in visual language, and they could articulate themselves beautifully and comfortably visually. But what they struggled with was the individuality, seeing the individuality as the total of their identity. And so when they talked about their selves, they were always connecting to something else or someone else. For Māori, that's their whakapapa, their genealogy. So they never think about themselves as, they're certainly individual, but they never think about themselves as not connected to something else, which is a very different way of thinking for the other students in that cohort. So that sort of ideology where they hold interconnectedness and reciprocal relationships, which has akoranga as core to their culture and lives, was super important in the work that they were doing. So that's, for Māori, that's matauranga Māori, or Māori knowledge. And Te Ao Māori, their worldview, and that speaks to that connection of people and place. And importantly, it's to tangible and intangible things, which we often don't rate the intangible quite the same way or articulate it well. And the Pacific students spoke of tawa, which is time and space. And again, in a design school, those two words are gold in everything that we do, but we have very different understandings of them. So time and space, tawa, but also as an extension of that is te olawa, which is those eternal connections, again, if you think of genealogy. But you can also think of that when we talk about our connection to the planet. It's it is what it is, and it's forever, and we can't change the past. And they just have this beautiful way of being able to simply articulate that and understand the individual responsibilities, along with the collective understandings and responsibilities that go with that. So in a design school, it's just seemed to be the best trajectory or the best way to be able to speak about these things. As a designer, the other thing we talked about in our design history and theory, we always talk about, the moving from chaos to order and back again. Well, that's what tawa is all about, is sort of that space in which that stuff happens, that pendulum swinging. And so for me, was the starting point of where I sort of tried to sort of build the curriculum for first year in DSI around sort of those connections. Some of the practicalities of how we do that. In our course, which is, what do we call it, design in a global context, we try to sort of draw parallels and we put sort of Indigenous knowledge sort of in front of or alongside that Eurocentric history that we all know about. We might discuss Owen Jones' fascination with Māori and Pacifica ideologies, their ability to transpose into 2 and 3D, which he heavily discussed and admired in the Grammar of Ornament. We might talk about Buckminster Fuller's visit to New Zealand, where he felt he might learn something from Māori narratives and rhythms, the flora, fauna and the bird songs. And in other classes later, but in the DSI program, we join with Terry Irwin and the team at CMU around transition design. And we look at ways that we can find tools to actually enable that use of Indigenous knowledge, and we example sort of Māori and Pacifica in that space, and so our students sort of participate a bit in there. And the other thing is we've translated all our programs, courses, titles into te reo, so the students understand from perhaps a language that is more visual and nuanced in how it thinks about and explains things, that we can understand these ideas of sustainability through other eyes, really. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So my next question is one concerning representation, not only in the student body, but also in the staff body. An Indigenous Australian writer with whom I've recently worked, Maddie Clark, emphasises the fact that decolonisation is not a metaphor. And in the Australian context, this is particularly important because here there is no treaty between Indigenous Australians and the settler colonial government. And so land rights must be a part of any meaningful conversation about reconciliation at a national level. But at an institutional level, I think this means that it's not enough for white educators to discuss reconciliation, but rather that Indigenous educators must be welcomed into the staff body. And I have to say it's not something that we are doing sufficiently well in Australia at the moment. But I note also that there will necessarily be teething problems because, as you recognise in your chapter, as Indigenous colleagues join the faculty, a disproportionate responsibility for the work of reconciliation within the organisation can sometimes fall upon a small number of Indigenous colleagues. And so I was hoping that you might be able to tell me more about the ways in which you're sharing the load for the integration of Indigenous knowledge into design education at Victoria.
Well, as you said, I don't think any of us are doing a good enough job at that yet. I don't know that it would be up to any of us to decide when the job is done either. So I do have to say, though, that the Indigenous staff, the Māori staff and the Pacifica staff that we have in our university and school are actually amongst the most generous people and academics that I've ever worked with. But they're also very well versed in resilience and mana, the respect for themselves and respect for others. So they have a very kind way of, bringing you into the space and talking to you about ways that, yes, your work is helpful, but perhaps speak about it in this way. Perhaps don't use this word, use that word. Even our English words have meaning to them that, we haven't really thought about. So yeah, I have to, I owe a great deal of gratitude, and also the ability to, send writing off, send ideas about coursework off to them, and they're in other faculties, and always have a response from them around, this might be good, maybe do it this way, you could add this to it. And I guess I can only speak from my experience of wishing to engage with this knowledge and find ways to, include it into or find space for it to impact what is still a very Eurocentric educational space. So yeah, as part of seeking to engage Māori and Pacific into the school is also being aware of ensuring that staff actually have agency in that space to impact it in the way they see fit. And I speak a little bit about that later in terms of design, but it's like, that rangatiratanga, that autonomy, it's not about lip service to it, it's not about here's the numbers, it's about what's the impact and how have you enabled that impact. And I have to say that in the work that I was doing in first year when changing the curriculum, some of it was brought about by the university wanting to better accommodate Māori students in this difficult environment. And, I'm sure, as all educators realise, when you actually cater for those students or enable the students who are struggling, you enable everybody. It's actually best practice. The rest of it is just, targeting the ones who can already do half this stuff anyway. So you sort of realise there's your, as an educator, there's your learning yourself. This is the best way to do things, and that's part of that sort of to and fro, that reciprocal relationship that you have. That is Te Ao Māori, that is tikanga Māori, the values and protocols that they offer so much to teaching. The idea of, manaakitanga, respect, kindness, hospitality, and generosity. Well, if that's not education, what is? Also, whanangatanga, the authentic connections, as an educator, understanding and acknowledging when you don't know something, we talk this game, but, it's kind of difficult when we're faced with some things in the classroom. And we need to find ways and means to really engage because we all sit in this space. So for perhaps, our colleagues that I work with, we don't have to sit in line. The treaty does put a ribbon around everything. But yeah, sitting in that space, you don't have to be in line, that's okay. But we need to recognise our connections and our disconnections to this knowledge, and what our responsibilities are in that space to each other. And so I guess, to answer that question, acknowledging what you don't know, acknowledging how you might find out what you don't know, and committing to do that at whatever pace. No one's saying by Tuesday you need to be fluent in reo or there's trouble. You know, it's like, it's acknowledging that you believe in it, that you see that it should be there. And that goes a really long way. For myself in our DSI program, I can't thank my colleagues David Hakara and Bobby Luke enough for the work that they do, just by speaking reo in the room, by always, you know, enabling me to ask them questions that can, you know, I often start my questions by, I'm sorry if this isn't PC, but I need to know, can I say this? You know, do I have the right to talk about this? And they just let me know. I guess my reciprocity with them is that I'm a bit more of an old hand at the local institutional knowledge. So hopefully I can repay them by giving them some of the my local knowledge, and that helps them navigate and impact the terrain. But I do have to add that I have to top it up with a lot of homemade chicken pies, because it's not enough. My chicken pies are pretty good, by the way.
Excellent.
So yeah, that's my way of matching their generosity. I guess it's acknowledging what you know and what you don't know, and giving them the autonomy to deal with the space as they see fit.
Wonderful, thank you. I think this idea of humility in respect of the local leads into my next question, which is to say that it seems that much of your work and thinking could be extended to other places around the world, such as Australia and Canada, but of course also to many other places outside of the historical British colonial context. And yet different work certainly needs to be done in these different places. For example, in Australia, there are more than 250 Indigenous languages, more than 800 dialects, and in some areas, many different languages are spoken over a small area. And so the concept of a bicultural society that I first encountered in New Zealand is not something that can apply in the Australian context. And so I was wondering if you might be able to offer some thoughts regarding those aspects of your work in New Zealand that might be applicable or otherwise not to other national contexts.
Yeah, thank you for that recognition of the global sort of applicability of a lot of this work. And, you know, I can't claim it as my work because so much is being done by many in this space. And I guess I've spoken on a lot of occasions about how by acknowledging sort of local place-based knowledge, extending respect, not seeking to be the expert in the space as we were taught in designers that we were, that designers can impact positive change by undertaking what I think is values-led design. So it's not so much about, well, for us, we don't mean to demean it, but maybe we're lucky to have, you know, a single language that we can, you know, learn and understand. I also think that, and for us, there's a wonderful quote by a young Māori designer, Katarina Davis, when she says that she works in the field of DSI. And she always says mataranga Māori, or Māori knowledge, is designed for social innovation. And it is that because of the values. And yes, we talk about the values using te reo, but that's because, perhaps I'll talk about some of them and then you'll understand it, I'll explain it a little better. So within Te Ao Māori or Māori, Mataranga Māori, tikanga are the protocols and the values that sit within things. So within values-led design, rather than value-led design, you would have something like inclusiveness, which is whanaungatanga, respect, which is manaakitanga, and the sustainable or sustaining approach to things, which is kaiakitanga, kakiakitanga. But also they offer us rangatiratanga, and here is where I believe design stumbles. So the first point is that for us as Western designers, or for me as a Western designer, having to move into another language and have it explained, that those words explained to me gave so much more depth and richness and capability to the work that you could do. And so one might be, yes, this idea of rangatiratanga, and this is the one that I believe that design really stumbles on. So we have kakiakatanga, which means sustainability, which is about guardianship and stewardship, not ownership. So you have manaki, which is around, you know, respect and kindness, and you can think about that in relation to your mum, or you can think about it in relation to your veggie garden or your ocean or whatever. Kakiakatanga, the idea of, you know, this is mine to look after, and many Indigenous cultures have this. This is mine to look after for the generations to come, and to respect those who got it to me in the, you know, in the condition that's in, or gave it to me. And, you know, I think we can all say Western doesn't do that. So the idea of rangatiratanga, where again the designer comes in and works through many Eurocentric models, methods and mindsets within this problem-solving scenarios, their design thinking, co-design, all of those things. But we always seem to stop short of giving autonomy to those with the issue, the problem, the marginalised, the whatever. We still maintain that, yay, thanks for helping us identify what your problem is. And I'm just going to take this $3.2 billion and I'm going to allocate it in ways that are really going to help you. And that's, you know, it's just crazy in terms of to think that those who understand their connection to this issue, they understand more so than any of us, that again, we sort of get them to help with the solution, but then move the ability to enable that solution away again. So I think for me, design is really falling down at that point in its development of tools as it moves along into sort of co-design, design thinking, strategic, all that stuff. I think the discipline of design needs to find solace in knowing when to take its hands off the wheel.
I think that's an excellent summary.
They can design the steering wheel, but they just get their hands off it.
That's a great metaphor, one I think to hold on to, no pun intended. So my final question, and this from one educator to another, and moving back a little to the pragmatics of doing or leading or supporting or stewarding quality education practices. You mentioned in your concluding remarks to your chapter that, I quote, "The goal of your endeavours is to enable a new generation of designers with a nuanced appreciation and respect for the connectivity and values imbued within Indigenous knowledge." And so I was wondering if you might be able to tell us more about the graduate attributes that you might like to see in this new generation of designers, or in other words, how will you know when the work that you and your colleagues are doing there is working?
I already get a sense that something's changing. I don't know about whether my work's working, but things are changing when students come to you and say, okay, I think we're ready for a major in Indigenous knowledge. Whereas, 3 or 4 years ago, or 5 or 6 years ago, I was getting pushback from students about, shouldn't this be optional? Why do we have to do it? And I was like, I won't tell you what I said, but anyway. But I think, and as I kind of noted in that essay, that at Te Heranawaka, which is the University of Wellington, it places in its strategic goals, whatever it is those PVCs all talk about, the integration, the engagement with Matauranga Māori. It has the tikanga, it has 5 tikanga as the strategic values of the university. And so already we're enabled. We don't have to convince anyone that we want to do this. It's a matter of finding ways to do it and finding people who can do it with and for us. So that's not always easy, but it's something that we have to do. So I guess some of our, what are they called?
Graduate attributes. Sorry for my institutional language.
No, we use them. I've even used them in essays. That idea of global citizenship, I think we all have it. And I think if we all look at each other's, they're quite similar. with what they really want to do. But like everything, it's back to that factory floor. It's, what are the ingredients? What's the process? Too bad about what you set up there, but, how are we actually enabling it down here? Who's doing the work? Yeah, I think it is that global citizenship. I think, again, heading back to that first year, where am I positioned, as a young designer in this world? Who am I sitting next to? How do I communicate with them? How am I connected to them? And then understanding that what are the issues we can engage in together with, knowing who you are, what you bring to the table, what your capability is to take on board what other people say. And I mentioned it in the essay Do the Mahi about the silent way. And it was a teaching theory that I stumbled across a number of years ago, but it's by a Frenchman from like the 18-somethings, where he did actually use Indigenous understandings of how they learn. And Māori are recognised as the most successful in maintaining language, teaching language, how they do it globally. So he was looking at a lot of other Indigenous ways, but the silent way actually enables that understanding of reciprocity within the educational group. So if you take the teacher and the students, what happens here is the silence of the teacher, of the educator, gives room for the student's cultural acumen, or the student difference, the individuality, or whatever it is. It allows that into the space. So again, you get that way back to, even if you want to go to the Bauhaus, that idea of teacher-student, the swap over all the time, the teacher becoming the student. So that reciprocity of learning, of teaching, sits within that space. So the students are empowered and actually allowed to bring their knowledge, and it's valued into that space. So particularly Indigenous knowledge and ways of being, just enabling that into the space. Yourself, if someone starts talking about any of their life experiences, or especially cultural experiences, there's no way to go but step backwards. If you're stepping forwards into their space, you are going the wrong way. Because they need all the oxygen at that time. And that's how I think students learn to go, one, to hear a lived experience, two, to understand, oh my God, someone does it differently to me. Because, I think people forget these, especially coming into university, these kids are 18. Kiwi kids, there's only a few of us. It's only 5 million of us. The experiences are pretty limited. And they come in so wonderfully agendaed and so keen to change the world. I'm sure you get it with your students, but finding those tools with them and giving them ways. Already I see that they're better listeners, they're better learners than, we call ourselves researchers and learners, but, we're pretty teleological about how we approach what we do, just going down, and they're all over the place, which, I enjoy a lot. But I think, one of the most beautiful adages that Māori have given my work anyway is one that is kia whakatumui te haere whakamua, which is my past is my present is my future. And it says it all when you start thinking about sustainability, kakiakatanga, your relationships with people. It's just all there. And so to me, it's just a beautiful way to teach and to learn and to be.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your thoughts. Before I make some concluding remarks, is there anything else you'd like to add? A question that I might not have asked, or
no, I just really thank Claudia and Nina for, they put a lot of work into this, a lot of time, a lot of tava into this. This came about through a conference where I spoke with David, my colleague, and I have to say I've never spoken at a conference before where people cried when they heard David do his pepeha, which is his introduction, where he explained his whakapapa, his genealogy of his work by, pulling out his arm and exposing all his tattoos and explaining where his son Wiramu sat in this thing. Someone stood up from Canada and said, I've never heard an Indigenous language spoken in a design conference before. Our 10-minute chat at the end went for 50 minutes. It was an amazing conference, and as I said, it was a turning point for us. And Claudia and Nina were a big part of that. And I actually wrote about that, and then they wrote back and said, no, we don't want to hear that again. We want to hear about the raw facts that is going on in your university when you really try to do this. So I had to write another piece, which I'm thankful for. But I'm thankful to them for it. And you for interviewing me.
Oh, pleasure is all mine. So many thanks again, Nan, for the opportunity to speak with you today. It's been great to discuss with you the work you've been doing with colleagues at Victoria University of Wellington, and to understand some more about the details of and the background to that work. And I look forward to hearing much more about this work into the future. And I too would like to thank colleagues at Valiz and also Perimeter Books and Distribution for the occasion and the opportunity for us to have had this conversation today. Thank you.
Nā mai, haere mai, thank you.